The night was cold, and rain poured down from the black sky. David pulled his jacket tighter as he walked along the empty street. The sound of water hitting the pavement was the only thing he could hear. It was late, and most people were already inside their warm homes. He just wanted to reach his apartment, make a cup of tea, and forget about the long day at work. Then he heard it, a sound, soft and strange. Not the sound of rain, not the sound of the wind. It was like a small hum, almost like music, but broken. David stopped, his eyes searching the shadows. Under the flickering light of a bus stop, he saw her, a small figure sitting on the wet bench. Her hair was dark and stuck to her face from the rain. Her clothes were thin, completely soaked. But what caught his attention most were her eyes. They were silver, shining faintly in the dark. For a moment, he thought it was a trick of the light. But when she looked up at him, he knew it was real. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "Be my dad. I won't misbehave." David froze, unsure if he had heard her right. "What?" he asked. She stood, her small hands trembling. "My stepmother. She kicked me out. I have nowhere to go." Her words were simple, but there was something strange about them, something not normal. She didn't sound like a lost child asking for help. She sounded desperate, like someone running from something dangerous. David looked around. That's when he saw them, two tall shapes, standing in the shadows across the street. They didn't move like normal people. They stood too still, and even through the rain, he could see a faint blue glow coming from their bodies. A shiver ran down his spine. The girl noticed them too. Her silver eyes widened, and she grabbed his hand. "They found me," she whispered. "Please, we have to go." David's heart started to race. He didn't know who they were or why they were here, but something deep inside told him not to leave her there. The shapes began to move, their steps slow but heavy. It felt like they were hunting. The rain splashed against the ground as David pulled the girl with him. "Come on," he said. They ran down the street, their footsteps echoing in the empty night. David glanced back. The two figures were following. Even in the rain, they moved fast, faster than they should have been able to. The girl kept looking over her shoulder, fear in her glowing eyes. "Who are they?" David asked as they ran their hunters. She said, "My stepmother sent them to take me back." Her voice shook, and the way she said "take me back" made David feel sick. He didn't want to know what would happen if they caught her. They turned into a side street. David spotted an old warehouse, its doors broken and hanging. He pulled her inside. The air was damp and smelled of rust. The only light came from cracks in the walls where the rain dripped through. David pressed his back against the wall, listening. The girl tried to catch her breath, water dripping from her hair. "What's your name?" he whispered. "Lyra." She replied softly. Her voice was calm now, but her eyes kept glancing toward the doorway. Outside, heavy footsteps splashed in the puddles. The shadows moved past the broken windows. David's pulse hammered in his ears. He could hear a faint humming sound again. It was coming from the hunters. Lyra's silver eyes dimmed as she backed away from the door. "They can sense me," she whispered. "We can't stay here." David nodded. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew one thing. If they stayed, they'd be caught. He grabbed her hand again, and they crept toward the back of the warehouse. The rain outside was louder now. It almost covered the sound of the hunters' boots. Almost, just as they reached the back door, a loud metallic crash echoed through the space. David spun around. The front doors had been kicked open. The hunters stepped inside, their glowing eyes scanning the dark. David didn't wait. He pushed the door open, and they ran into the night. The cold rain hit their faces. Behind them, the strange blue glow spilled out of the warehouse like light from another world. They ran through the wet streets. Lyra's small hand clutching his tightly. David didn't know who she truly was or why these creatures were after her. But he knew one thing: he couldn't leave her. Not tonight, not ever. Somewhere behind them, the hunters followed, their steps steady, their voices low and in a language David had never heard. The rain washed over the city, but the danger didn't fade. And deep inside, David knew this was only the beginning. The rain kept falling, but the sound of footsteps was louder. David pulled Lyra around the corner, his heart pounding in his chest. The streets were almost empty, only the hum of streetlights and the splash of water under their shoes. But behind them, the hunters were coming. They didn't run like humans, they glided. Each step silent yet fast. David didn't understand how they moved so quickly, but they were closing in. "Keep running," David said, gripping her hand tighter. Lyra's breathing was sharp, her silver eyes flicking in every direction. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Not until I'm back in her hands." David didn't ask who her was. He didn't have the breath. But the weight in Lyra's voice told him this wasn't just about family drama. This was something much bigger. They turned into a narrow alley, the walls on each side wet with rain. David hoped they could lose the hunters here. But when he glanced back, he froze. The blue glow was brighter now. The two hunters stepped into the alley, tall and silent, their armor slick with water. David could finally see their faces, or what was left of them. They weren't fully human. Their skin was pale and stretched, their eyes completely black. Metal lines ran along their jaws, and faint steam hissed from vents in their necks. "Go," David shouted, pushing Lyra ahead. They ran through the alley, the hunters moving faster. Lyra's shoes slipped on the wet ground, but David caught her. They reached the end of the alley only to find a high fence blocking their way. David didn't stop to think. He boosted Lyra up, her small hands grabbing the metal bars. She climbed quickly, her movements sharp and practiced. David followed, his hands freezing against the wet steel. He dropped down on the other side, just as a hunter's hand slammed into the fence with a metallic thud. The sound echoed in David's ears as they ran into the next street. Here, the rain was heavier, turning the ground into shallow rivers. The lights from the city reflected off the water, making it look like they were running across liquid glass. David glanced at Lyra, even in the rain and fear. Her eyes glowed brighter than before. "Why are they after you?" he asked, breathless. "They're not after me," Lyra said quietly. "They're after what I carry." Before David could ask what she meant, a sharp whistling sound cut through the air. Something metallic smashed into the wall next to him, sending sparks flying. The hunters were using weapons now, small, glowing discs that spun through the air like deadly boomerangs. One whizzed past David's head, close enough to slice through the edge of his hood. He pushed Lyra into a side door of an abandoned shop. The door creaked, but it opened. Inside it was dark and smelled of dust and mold. David pressed his back to the wall, listening to the faint hum outside. Lyra's hands shook as she pulled something from her pocket. It was a small crystal, glowing faintly under the dim light. "What is that?" David whispered. "My way home," she said, "but it's broken." David didn't understand. A broken crystal didn't explain why two inhuman hunters were chasing them across the city. But before he could ask more, the hum grew louder. "They've found us," Lyra said, her voice tight with fear. David grabbed her hand again, pulling her toward the back of the shop. They slipped through a broken door into another alley. The rain hit their faces again, cold and sharp. This time, the hunters were already there. One stood at the far end of the alley, blocking their escape. The other dropped down from the roof, landing between David and the open street. David's heart raced. There was no way out. The hunters stepped forward, speaking in a low, Lyrian language that made the hair on David's neck stand up. Lyra backed against the wall, clutching the crystal. "Stay behind me," David said, even though he knew he didn't have a weapon. The hunters moved closer, their glowing eyes fixed on Lyra. Then, without warning, Lyra raised her free hand. The air shimmered, and a pulse of light burst out from her palm. It wasn't bright like a flashlight. It was strange, bending the rain, warping the air. The hunters froze for half a second, their armor crackling. David didn't wait. He grabbed Lyra and shoved past the smaller gap between the hunters. One reached for him, metal fingers grazing his jacket, but they made it into the street, running as fast as their legs could carry them. David didn't know where he was going. He only knew he had to keep moving. The city around them was a blur of wet lights and shadow somewhere far off. Sirens wailed, but they felt distant, unreal. The hunters' glow faded behind them. For now, they had escaped, but David knew it wouldn't last. Lyra's silver eyes met his, and in that moment he saw something, not just fear, but a strange kind of hope. "I trust you," she said. Softly, David didn't know why she trusted him, but as the rain poured down, he realized he was willing to risk everything to keep her safe. The streets were quieter now. David led Lyra through a maze of narrow lanes, trying to put as much distance as possible between them and the hunters. The rain had slowed, but his heart still raced like it was trying to break free from his chest. He had so many questions, but he didn't know where to start. They reached an old parking garage, the kind that hadn't been used in years. Rust covered the railings, and weeds grew through cracks in the concrete. David guided Lyra inside, finding a dark corner where they could hide. He leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. "All right," he said, his voice low. "You need to tell me what's going on." Lyra hesitated, her silver eyes glimmering faintly in the dark. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the crystal again. It was small enough to fit in her palm, shaped like a tear, the glow inside. It pulsed like a slow heartbeat. "This," she whispered, "is the only way I can go home." David stared at it. "It's a rock," he said. Lyra shook her head. "It's not a rock, it's a star key." David frowned. "Star key." He repeated, "It opens a path between worlds," Lyra explained. "My father gave it to me before he died." Her voice softened when she mentioned her father, but then her jaw tightened. "When my stepmother took over, she wanted this key. She said it belonged to her, but it doesn't. It belongs to me." David ran a hand through his wet hair. "And those hunters, they're her people." Lyra nodded slowly. "They don't stop. They can track me anywhere, as long as the key still works." David looked at the crystal again. "But you said it's broken." "It is," Lyra said. "The core inside is damaged. I can't open the path home unless I fix it. And the only thing that can repair it is here, on Earth." David tilted his head. "That doesn't make sense. Why would something alien need something from Earth?" Lyra's eyes darted away. "Because Earth isn't just another planet," she whispered. "It's a safe world, a place even the worst rulers can't touch. My father told me it's older than people think." David didn't know what to say. He wanted to believe her, but part of him still felt like this was a dream. Except the hunters weren't a dream. Their black eyes, the cold metal in their skin, he had seen it with his own eyes. He knew danger when he felt it. And whatever Lyra was mixed up in, it was real, suddenly. A faint hum echoed through the garage. David's stomach dropped. "They found us," Lyra said, clutching the crystal tightly. David peeked around the corner. No one was there yet. But the hum was getting louder. He grabbed Lyra's hand. "Come on, we're not staying here." They moved quickly, heading for the far exit. But halfway there, David saw movement in the shadows. A hunter stepped out from behind a pillar. Its black eyes locked on Lyra. Another one appeared behind them, blocking the way out. David's pulse spiked. They were trapped again. Lyra looked at David. Her voice was calm. To calm for a child in danger, I can stop them for a moment. But you have to trust me, she said. David nodded without thinking. Lyra raised the crystal, and the glow inside it surged. A wave of pale light washed over the garage. The hunters froze mid-step, their bodies trembling like they were caught. In invisible chains, go! Lyra shouted. David grabbed her and ran. They dashed past the hunters, the strange light flickering like a dying flame. Just as they reached the exit, the light went out. And the hunters roared in some alien tongue. Their footsteps followed again. David and Lyra burst into the open street, the cool air hitting their faces. Neon signs from nearby shops reflected in the puddles. David spotted a crowded night market ahead. If they could disappear into the people, maybe they could lose the hunters. They pushed through the crowd, weaving between food stalls and flashing lights. David kept glancing over his shoulder. He couldn't see the hunters, but that didn't mean they were gone. Lyra held the crystal close to her chest, her eyes scanning every face. They won't give up, she said quietly. David didn't answer. He knew she was right. Finally, they slipped into a small side alley, hidden behind a bakery. David leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. He looked at Lyra. All right, if this thing is so important and your stepmother wants it so badly, what happens if she gets it? Lyra hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. She'll use it to take over more than just my planet. She'll take over every world she can find. The key can open paths anywhere. David stared at her. So if she wins, Earth could be next. Lyra nodded, her silver eyes serious. That's why I can't let her have it. That's why I need your help. David felt the weight of her words. He wasn't just helping a lost child anymore. He was standing between a powerful alien ruler and something that could destroy worlds. And somehow, in the middle of all this, a part of him already knew he wasn't going to walk away. Not now, not ever. Far away in the shadows, a faint blue glow moved slowly toward them. The hunters were still out there, and the night was far from over. The rain had finally stopped. The streets glistened under the pale light of the street lamps. David led Lyra through the quieter side of the city. He didn't take her straight home. Instead, he looped through side alleys and empty lanes, just to be sure no one was following by the time they reached his apartment building. The sky was lighter, hinting at dawn. His place was small, just one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living space that doubled as a dining room. David unlocked the door and stepped aside for Lyra. She hesitated at the entrance, her glowing silver eyes scanning everything inside. It's not much, David said, but it's safe. Lyra stepped in slowly, as if she expected danger even here. She kept the crystal clutched in her hand. David noticed she never let it go, not even for a second. All right, David said after closing the door. We need to make some rules. Rules. Lyra tilted her head. Yes, David replied. You can stay here, but you have to do exactly what I say. No wandering off, no talking to strangers, and no glowing in public. Lyra frowned. I can't control the glow, she said quietly. Then you'd better learn, David said, or they'll find you. Lyra didn't argue, but her eyes softened. You're letting me stay? She asked, almost like she didn't believe it. For now, David said, but you have to follow my rules. She nodded, and in that moment, something changed. She didn't look like a lost alien girl anymore. She looked like a child finally. Allowed to breathe, David made her a cup of hot tea. And for the first time that night, she relaxed. But even then, her gaze kept drifting to the window, like she was expecting the hunters to burst in at any moment. The next day, David tried to make her blend in. He found an old hoodie and a pair of jeans for her to wear. The hoodie's hood was big enough to shadow her glowing eyes. He also gave her sunglasses, which she found amusing. She tried them on and smiled for the first time, but the moment was short. David noticed she kept her back to the wall no matter. Where she stood, it was instinct. She was used to watching for threats. While David cooked a simple breakfast, Lyra sat at the table, studying him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. David shrugged, because no one should be out in the rain like that. "That's not the real reason," she said quietly. David didn't answer. He didn't know the real reason himself. Maybe it was because the way she looked at him that night reminded him of something he'd lost long ago. After breakfast, David told her to rest, but she shook her head. "I need to fix the star key." She said, "We don't have much time. What happens if we don't?" David asked. "They'll find me, and they'll find you," she replied. David stared at the crystal in her hand. Its soft glow seemed calmer now, like it was waiting. Later that evening, David stepped out to buy some supplies. When he returned, Lyra was sitting on the couch, the TV on. She was watching a nature documentary, her eyes wide as if she'd never seen Earth animals before. David smiled a little, but the moment was interrupted when his phone began to ring. The number was unknown. He answered. A deep, cold voice came through the speaker. "Give us the girl, and we'll let you live." David froze. His eyes flicked to Lyra. She was still watching the TV, unaware. "Who is this?" he asked. "You know who we are," the voice said. "She is not yours, human. Hand her over before you regret it." David's grip tightened on the phone. "She's not going anywhere," he said. The voice let out a sound that wasn't quite laughter. "Then you've chosen your fate," it said before the line went dead. David lowered the phone slowly. He didn't tell Lyra what the call was about, not yet. But inside, he knew the hunters were getting closer. And now they knew exactly where he lived that night. David set up a small bed for Lyra in the corner of his room. She didn't protest, but she kept the crystal under her pillow. He could see she didn't sleep much. Every little sound made her tense. At one point she sat up and whispered, "You should leave me." David looked at her. "That's not happening," he said. For the first time, Lyra's eyes shimmered. Not just with light, but with something like gratitude. Outside the city slept, but in the distance, a faint blue glow moved slowly through the streets. The hunters were still searching, and soon they would come knocking. The next morning was gray. The air outside David's apartment felt heavy. Like the city itself knew something bad was coming. David barely slept. The voice from the unknown call still echoing in his head. "Give us the girl, and we'll let you live." He knew they weren't bluffing. If the hunters found them, there would be no mercy. Lyra sat at the table, sipping tea quietly. She hadn't asked about the phone call, but her eyes told him she suspected something. David didn't want to scare her still. He knew hiding wasn't enough anymore. Sooner or later, they'd have to face this. The phone rang again just after noon. "Same unknown number," David answered, his voice calm. "This is your last chance," the cold voice said. "Meet us tonight, alone, at the old train station." David hesitated. If he didn't go, they might come here. If he did go, he could be walking into a trap. But maybe, just maybe, he could turn it into his own plan. "Fine," he said. "I'll be there." When he hung up, Lyra stared at him. "You're going to meet them?" she said. David nodded. "They want you, but they think I'll bring you to them." Her eyes widened. "You're going to fight them?" "I'm going to make sure they stop chasing us," David said. Lyra frowned. "They won't stop unless they're gone." David didn't reply, but inside, he knew she was right. Evening came fast. The old train station sat at the edge of the city, abandoned for years. Its walls were covered in graffiti, and the tracks outside were rusted and broken. David led Lyra there, keeping her hood up. They stayed in the shadows. He had no real weapon, only a heavy metal pipe he'd found near his building. It wasn't much, but it was something. They entered through a side door. The air inside cold and damp. The silence was thick, broken only By the sound of water dripping from the ceiling, David scanned the dark corners. "I don't see them," he whispered. "They see us," Lyra replied. Her voice soft, a low hum filled the space. The blue glow appeared from the shadows. Two hunters stepped forward, their black eyes fixed on Lyra. "You brought her," the voice said, coming not from their mouths, but from some device inside their armor. David stepped in front of Lyra, gripping the pipe. "You're not taking her," he said. The hunters tilted their heads. "You can't stop us, human." The voice replied, "Maybe not." David said, "But I can make it difficult." One of the hunters moved fast. Swinging an arm toward David, he ducked, the metal pipe smashing into the alien's side. A sharp crack rang out, but the creature barely flinched. The other hunter advanced toward Lyra. She stepped back. Clutching the crystal, suddenly the crystal flared with light. It wasn't like before. This time, it was sharper. More alive, the hunters froze for a moment, their armor buzzing. "Run!" David shouted. They sprinted toward the side exit, but more figures appeared, blocking the way. 4 more hunters surrounding them. David's stomach dropped. This was worse than he thought. The voice spoke again. "You can't run forever." David tightened his grip on the pipe. "Then we fight," he said. The hunters moved in. Their movements too fast, too precise. David swung the pipe at one, but another grabbed it and snapped it in half like it was nothing. Lyra raised the crystal again. The glow grew brighter, filling the station with an eerie white light. The hunters hesitated, shielding their eyes. David grabbed Lyra's hand. Pulling her through the smallest gap in the circle, they ran along the platform, jumping down onto the rusted tracks. Behind them, the hunters roared and gave chase. They weaved between broken train cars. David's heart pounded with every step. A sudden metallic worry filled the air. One of the spinning discs flew past them, slicing through a steel beam like it was paper. David pushed Lyra to the ground just in time to avoid another. They scrambled behind a train car, breathing hard. "They're not stopping," David whispered. "They won't until they have me," Lyra said, her voice shaking. "But the crystal, it reacted to them. It's getting stronger." David looked at her. "Then maybe it's not just a key," he said. Lyra hesitated. "It's more than a key," she admitted. "It can open doors, but it can also close them forever." David's mind raced. If they could close the path the hunters were using, maybe they could trap them here or keep more from coming. But first, they had to survive this night. The hunters were getting closer, their blue glow lighting the dark like ghostly fire. David took a deep breath. "All right," he said. "We're not running anymore." Lyra looked at him in surprise. "We fight?" "We fight," David replied, gripping the broken piece of pipe like it was still a weapon. Somewhere in the shadows of the old station, the final confrontation of the night began. And David knew this was only the start of a much bigger war. The night air outside the train station was colder than before. David and Lyra ran until their legs burned, the sound of the hunters fading behind them. They didn't stop until they reached the cover of an old storage yard. Hidden between 2 crumbling warehouses, David leaned against a wall, trying to catch his breath. His hands were shaking, and not just from the cold. Lyra stood nearby, holding the crystal close to her chest. The glow inside it was stronger than ever, pulsing like a living thing. David noticed it and frowned. "That? Things changing," he said. Lyra didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on the crystal, almost like she was afraid of it. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft. "It's not just a star key." David raised an eyebrow. "You've been saying that all along." "No," she said quickly. "I mean, it's more than even I told you." David stepped closer. "All right, then tell me the truth." Lyra looked up at him, her silver eyes shining in the dim light. "My father told me the key could open paths between worlds, but he didn't tell me it could also destroy them." David's stomach tightened. destroy. She nodded slowly. If the core inside it is charged in the wrong way, it doesn't open a door, it collapses it. Everything on the other side is erased. David stared at her. And your stepmother knows this? Yes, Lyra said. That's why she wants it, not to travel, but to wipe out anyone who stands in her way. She could burn through 100 worlds, and Earth would just be the beginning. David ran a hand through his hair. Then why didn't you tell me earlier? Because the more people know, the more dangerous it becomes. Lyra said, her voice trembling. Even good people can turn into monsters with power like this. The truth hung heavy between them. David understood now why the hunters wouldn't stop. They weren't just after a lost child. They were after a weapon. And somehow, this weapon was in the hands of a scared girl who had no one else to protect her. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed from the far side of the yard. David froze. Through the narrow gap between the warehouses, he saw a faint blue glow. "They've found us again," he said. Lyra's grip on the crystal tightened. "Then we can't run anymore," she whispered. "We have to end this." David looked at her. "You're talking about using it." She nodded. "If I charge it just enough, I can close the path they use to follow me. They won't be able to call for reinforcements. But what?" David asked. "It could kill them instantly," she said. "And it could also hurt you if you're too close." David didn't hesitate. "Then you do what you have to. I'll keep them off you while you work." Lyra shook her head. "You don't understand. They'll come for me the second I start charging it. They'll know what I'm doing. Then I'll just have to make sure they don't get that far." David replied, his voice firm. The blue glow grew brighter. David could hear the metallic steps now. 2 hunters appeared at the far end of the yard, their black eyes scanning the shadows. Lyra crouched down. Placing the crystal on the ground in front of her, her hands hovered over it, the glow flickering wildly as she began to hum a strange, low tone. David didn't know the language, but it made the hair on his arm stand up. The hunters moved forward. David grabbed a rusted steel rod from the ground and stepped into their path. "Hey!" he shouted. They turned toward him, their eyes narrowing. The first one lunged, but David sidestepped and slammed the rod into its side. It barely slowed, but it bought a second, just enough for Lyra to keep working the second hunter through. One of its spinning discs, David ducked as it whistled past his head, embedding into the wall behind him. He swung at the creature, but it caught the rod in one hand and yanked it away. David stumbled back, dodging another strike behind him. The crystal's glow became almost blinding. "They're almost here," Lyra called. David turned just in time to see the first hunter charging at her. He threw himself in its path, the impact knocking the wind out of him. The force sent him crashing to the ground, but he scrambled up again. He couldn't let them reach her. Not now. The glow from the crystal surged into a pure white light. A strange vibration filled the air, rattling the walls and making the ground tremble. The hunters froze mid-step, their armor sparking as if something inside them was tearing apart. Lyra shouted something in her alien tongue, and the light exploded outward. David shielded his eyes. When he looked again, the hunters were gone, not dead, just erased, like they'd never been there. The yard was silent except for Lyra's ragged breathing. She picked up the crystal, now dim again, and looked at him. "They can't call for more," she said quietly. But she'd come herself now. David knew she meant the stepmother, and somehow he knew she was right. The fight wasn't over. It was about to get much worse. The night sky above the city was no longer dark. It burned with streaks of silver and blue as a massive shadow descended through the clouds. David and Lyra stood on the roof of his apartment building, staring upward. The ship was unlike anything David had seen before, a towering shape of black metal, moving without sound, its surface alive with rippling light. Lyra's voice trembled. "She's here." David didn't need to ask who, the stepmother had arrived. The woman who sent hunters across the galaxy. The one who wanted the crystal not just for power, but for destruction. David tightened his fists. They had fought off the hunters, but this was different. This wasn't a scout team. This was the queen herself. The ship hovered over the tallest building in the city. A beam of pale light shot down, and from it a figure appeared, tall, cloaked in shimmering silver, her eyes the same color as Lyra's. But colder, sharper, her voice carried across the rooftops without her lips moving. "Child," she said, "you have caused me enough trouble. Give me the key, and I will make your death painless." Lyra stepped forward, her hand gripping the crystal. "You killed my father," she said, her voice steady. "You destroyed my home. You will never have this." The stepmother's smile was slow and cruel. "You think you can stop me? You are a child playing with a weapon you do not understand." David moved to stand beside Lyra. "She's not alone," he said. The stepmother's gaze shifted to him. "A human," she said. Almost with disgust, "You protect her because you think it makes you noble, but you do not know what she truly is." David ignored her words. "Come down here and find out," he said. The stepmother raised a hand. The air shimmered. And from the light, more figures appeared. Armored guards, taller than the hunters, their weapons glowing faintly. David's jaw tightened. This was going to be worse than anything they had faced before. Lyra whispered to him without looking away from the enemy. "If I use the crystal at full power, I can send her away far beyond her empire, but it might destroy the ship. And maybe the city." David's stomach turned. "Then we find another way." He said, "There is no other way," Lyra replied. "She will burn this world if she wins." The guards moved first, stepping forward with precise, silent steps. David grabbed a metal pipe from the rooftop's maintenance area and swung as the first guard lunged. The blow rang out but barely slowed the armored figure. Lyra ducked behind him, the crystal in her hands glowing brighter. The stepmother's voice was calm and cold. "You cannot protect her forever." David fought with everything he had, blocking strikes and forcing the guards back just enough. For Lyra to work, the crystal's glow spread across the roof, making the air hum with strange energy. One of the guards broke past David. Reaching for Lyra, without thinking, David threw himself in the way, taking the hit to his shoulder. Pain shot through him, but he didn't stop. "Keep going," he shouted. The stepmother's cloak began to ripple as she stepped closer. "You think this child is your family," she said, "but she will bring you nothing but death." David glared at her. "She's my family, because I chose her," he said, "and I'll fight for her until my last breath." Lyra's voice rose in a chant, the same strange language she had used before. The crystal's glow turned blinding white, the hum becoming a deep, shaking vibration. The stepmother's eyes narrowed. She raised her hand. Sending a wave of energy toward Lyra, David stepped in front of it, the force throwing him back. His body ached, but he pulled himself up again. The crystal's power reached its peak. Light exploded outward, swallowing the rooftop, the city skyline, and the stepmother's guards. The stepmother herself screamed in fury as the light wrapped around her. "You cannot banish me forever," she shouted before vanishing into the blinding glow. When the light faded, the rooftop was quiet. The guards were gone. The sky above clear again. David dropped to one knee, breathing hard. Lyra stood, holding the crystal, now dim and cracked. "It's done," she whispered. "She's gone." "For now," David looked at her. "For now?" Lyra nodded. "She will find a way back. Maybe not soon, but one day." David stood, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll be ready," he said. Lyra's silver eyes softened for the first time. She smiled without fear. "You're my dad now," she said quietly. David felt something heavy in his chest lift. "Yeah," he replied. "I guess I am, far beyond the stars, in a place where the light had thrown her." The stepmother stood on a strange, dark world, her eyes burning with rage. She whispered to herself, "This isn't over." And somewhere deep inside the cracked crystal, a faint pulse of light answered.